Okay, thanks, Anna. I think first Matthew Hargraves, our Associate Curator of Collections Information here at Yale, is going to say a few words about how we got to thinking about linked open data first.
Yeah, I'll just give some background for everyone, just to explain how we got to this point now. It was really only in 2008 that the Centre really began to try and make its collections more accessible. If you had tried to find things in our collection before that time, everything at that point was still in sort of, databases like TMS behind the scenes at the Centre. Public access was mostly through card indexes still in various parts of the museum, both the library and, well, certainly for our prints and drawings collections. Library bibliographic information was in the central library system.
Matthew, we're having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, okay. Let me start.
Sorry to interrupt. If you could move closer to the mic.
Can you hear me now? Is that better now?
Eleanor, can you hear anything?
We hear you very well, but we had a hard time hearing Matthew.
Okay, so we're going to switch.
Hello, is that better?
Much better.
Oh, great. Okay, so I'll recap then. It was really only in 2008 that the Centre began to become very focused on making its collections more accessible. Up to that point, access to the collection for people to know what was actually here was very limited. It really relied on people being physically present here in New Haven, and there was very little. It was very hard for people, even within Yale itself, to know exactly what we had. Most of the art collections information was all stored in TMS, but that was very much a behind-the-scenes database. Patrons were reliant on using card indexes still to find things in the collections. Paintings collection was only known really through a 1984 publication with thumbnail, black and white images. So it wasn't a very accurate representation. And then people simply knew things we had because they'd seen them in exhibitions or in publications. So there was really no comprehensive view of our collections. The library collections, we have a significant library of secondary sources for the study of British art, as well as a very important collection of rare books and manuscripts. Both of those collections were catalogued in the Yale Central Library system. So there was no kind of coherent picture of collections as a whole at the Centre. And so in 2008, a decision was made that we had to remedy this. We began work with the initial goal of simply giving people a comprehensive view of what we had, and with the ability to search seamlessly, or as seamlessly as possible, across our art collections and our rare books and manuscripts and our other bibliographic holdings. So we began that project in 2008. By 2011, we launched the kind of first iteration of our online collection, where you can search across everything, or you can limit your search to just prints and drawings, paintings and sculpture, rare books, and so on. The goal of that really was to simply give people tombstone information for our collections. Where we had additional information, we began making that more available. We have been doing a lot more in the way of kind of traditional, in-depth cataloging, although we're working on means of actually disseminating that. But initially the goal was simply to give tombstone information. We also sort of spearheaded here at Yale a change in policy, Yale-wide change in policy in relation to images and reproductions. We adopted an open access policy for images of works of art that were in the public domain. We now allow people to download those directly from the site for any use whatsoever, commercial or non-commercial. And so we had this vision that this would support all kinds of activities, whether it's scholarly publishing or creative art and so on. We had a similar approach to our data as well for those objects. And the goal was always, beyond giving a kind of a picture on our website of the collections, was to avoid having a kind of silo of YCBA data, but to make our objects speak in relation to other collections, other objects, whether those are elsewhere in the United States, here at Yale, or beyond. Obviously, we have significant institutional partners in the United Kingdom, given the scope of our collections. So we wanted to be able to put our objects in dialogue with those, and our data in dialogue. That was really what initiated our investigations of the most efficient means of doing this. We had been somewhat involved in past projects that had attempted to do online catalog resumes of a particular artist's work, but those all required a kind of host institution to maintain a vast databases. Those kind of old sort of aggregation models had proved very inefficient. We found that our data was not being kept up to date. It was very hard to make updates. Images would come and go and will frankly disappear. So it looked to us a very inefficient model and not a very sustainable one, particularly as we embarked on this project in 2008 at the time of the Great Recession. So we began looking seriously at linked open data as a possibility, and engaged particularly with Dominic Oldman at the British Museum and his work on research space, that Mellon-funded project, which Emmanuelle, I'm sure, will be talking about in a moment. And just thinking about how we can put our objects into the web to allow other people to take that data and use it in ways we might anticipate, or also ways that we might not. And rather than putting all our energy into kind of one big digital project around one artist or one theme, we felt we should put our energy into making the data available for people out there to use according to their interests as they see fit. So that's really been the guiding philosophy behind our efforts over the last few years. And I can hand over to Emmanuelle to talk in more detail about linked open data.
Sure. So to build on what Matthew just said, let me kind of restate the 5 reasons we've found to use linked open data, and those 5 points will really drive my talk today. So here they are highlighted for you. We really looked at linked open data to enrich our data set, link to other museums' collections, enhance access to our museum collection, support scholarly research, as well as repurpose our own content. So if we think about the first point, which is enriching our data set by reusing the work of others, basically, that brings us back a little bit to what Pedro Zecchielli and Stephen Stead have highlighted in their presentation, which is one of the key principles of linked open data, which is to use your eyes for things. So as part of our cataloging, we reference the unique identifiers of concepts, people, and places in our object records. We try as much as possible to reference unique identifiers crafted by authoritative institutions, such as the Getty Research Institute, the Library of Congress, or the Virtual International Authority File. A great example of is the Getty Art and Architecture Thesaurus. For example, the unique identifier for cityscape in the AT here, and you see it is 300015571. It's useful, that ID is useful, because by referencing it in our data set, we point to its scope note, which you see here. It's broader as well as narrow terms in the AT. But it, in essence, it's just an ID, and it's not programmatically actionable from our data set. What is even more useful is that the Getty has just released the AT as a linked open data resource, and that's a screenshot of that new resource that you see up now. And now, instead of just referencing their IDs in our dataset, we're referencing their entire URIs, which are dereferenceable via the internet. That is, that they are actionable directly from our dataset. So here it's worth noticing the continuity between the IDs and the URIs. The Getty URIs contain the unique IDs, and if I'm looking at the URIs up here, and you will recognize the ID I spoke of just earlier. So the URIs build on those unique IDs. Both Pedro and Stephen talked about URIs, and for our purpose, URIs are unique and persistent URLs. They are persistent because the institution who mints them promises to maintain them forever. The links will never change and never break. The ICOM, the ICOM International Committee for Documentation in Museums, has published a very useful statement on linked data identifiers for museum objects, and I have put the URL in my last slide for you to look at. In a similar fashion, we want to reuse the name authority files created by the Getty's ULAN. But let me show you how the Getty AAT Cityscape URI shows up in our dataset. So what we're looking at here is a PABI rendering of our linked open dataset. And the last line before, or the one before last line, is the same ID we've talked about for Cityscape. So this is a URI we are embedding directly in our datasets now, and you can see all sorts of other subject tags we're borrowing from the AAT. We're also devising our own local thesauri when control vocabularies published. Authorized control vocabularies do not work for us. So we want to do the same thing for every single data byte, basically, in our dataset, and that includes people, obviously. And that brings an interesting point, is that we are looking at reusing the work done by WorldCat, which we see here on the left, VIF, and as well as ULAN, of course. And the point that it brings is that as a museum, we have decided to leverage works done by others, by other authoritative institutions. As a single museum, we would never be able to compete with the many years that WorldCat or ULAN or VIF have put together in compiling those beautiful name authority files for their constituents. So of course, we cannot wait until the Getty releases ULAN as a linked open data resource. I had to put this in there, right? This is just to contrast a little bit with what traditional data aggregators offer, which is a very different picture. Our data set in a traditional data aggregation is very much siloed. It's isolated from other data sets. The aggregators usually do not enhance our metadata. If anything else, they actually dumb down the data set that we hand them. And that's mostly for the reason of mapping multiple repositories data sets to one common core metadata schema, which is simplifying or reducing the complexity and the rich cultural heritage knowledge that we try to embed in our data sets. And finally, traditional data aggregators really are not, at least at this point, so interested in highlighted or crafting relationships between the entities in our data sets. So for us, really, the value added by linked open data is clear. It allows us to leverage collective work done by authoritative institutions. Another example of how our data is treated by data aggregators is this screenshot from the Yale single search box, which aggregates records from the Yale Center for British Art, but also the Yale University Art Gallery and the Peabody Natural History Museum, as well as a couple of more units on campus. But the point I wanted to make here is that this print in our record is actually made by Davis Lucas, but it is also mentioned in our record, not here, that it is after Turner. And so for the sake, again, of mapping multiple metadata schemas and data sets to one common core, this is what this one aggregator decided to do. Basically, only display the primary artists. And again, you know, we're very grateful to our Yale colleagues, but this is a little bit reductive, really, from what we expect. This is more of a discovery resource, and if people want to have more information about this particular object, they can go to directly to our native online environment, which is indicated at the bottom of the record here. Again, just to highlight the behavior of our data sets in traditional data aggregators, these are two oil paintings in the YCBA collection presented through the Google Cultural Institute platform. And while the Google platform is very useful in offering the comparison feature, the viewers are really left to their own device to determine what the relationships of these two paintings are. And especially with these two paintings, it's not always evident that the one on the left is actually a preparatory drawing for the larger painting on the right. What we really want to do is enable people to draft their own scholarship and come up with those relationships and embed them in the data that they would be generating. So on the right is a print at the British Museum, and on the left is the same painting we saw just before, which is at the YCBA. In essence, we really want to connect our data set to other museums' data set in order to be able to tell fuller stories about our objects. And this here I am showing a screenshot from the project Matthew mentioned a few minutes earlier, which is the Research Space project. Let me go back to my line here. The main reason is that we don't want to lock down. The reason we want to connect to other data sets is that we don't want to lock down our information in data silos, where it's difficult to reuse and integrate with other data sets. We also don't want to leave the users of our data set to guess the relationship between objects. And so there's a huge difference between the way traditional data aggregators present data and the way linked open data enables us to do so. And the value added in this case is that linked open data and the CDOC CRM, the conceptual reference model ontology that we chose, support semantic searches. We also know that the data will come at us from multiple sources, and so we're very keen. Here I'm showing on the right, lower right, a screenshot from our internal collections management system called TMS, a record about the exhibition that is featured online in our Drupal website, top left. And so we know that data will come at us from multiple resources, and there is really no good reason for us to try to ingest all of that into one single system. The point of linked open data is to be able to reach different data sets and harness the knowledge there. We don't want to have all of that locked down in one system. Let me see. So the third reason I mentioned why we're using linked open data is to enhance access to our data sets, which is really the reverse function of us connecting to other data sets, right? The underlying concept of linked open data is that knowledge can be interconnected, with relationships being made on the fly. In terms of traffic, that means enhanced traffic for us, since via linked open data, the YCBA dataset could get queried by people who don't know of the museum's existence, but get to our dataset through some aspect of our collection information that they are interested in. Oh, my slides are a little bit out of order, I apologize. One additional reason we're so keen about using linked open data is that we want to repurpose our own research. And here I am showing a screenshot from a linked data tool that we developed ourselves, and we call it the relationship builder. Again, this is a good example of how data does not always live in the main system in any given museum. And we feel that linking frame records to their painting records is a very good case. This relationship builder is a web-based I trust everybody can see my screen here, and thank you again for having me for a second time here. So last week I probably left off at the part where I was about to tell you about a linked data application that we have developed here at the Yale Center for British Art, and that we call the Relationship Builder. It's a web-based tool that we use to link our painting records to our frame records. And at this point, it would probably be helpful if I backed up a bit to explain that the YCBA has cataloged in depth its historical frame collection. So I'm going to go ahead and try to go to the next slide. I'm going to slip a little bit. There we go. So this is a typical online record for a painting with its tombstone information, subject terms, and images. And here is an online record for a frame, also with its tombstone information, subject terms, and images. The problem is that, as is, they are both standalone records. They are not connected in any structured way, except for what we deduce as humans. And that is that this and this little image here is what the framed painting looks like. And if I look at both records a bit more, I might realize that the accession number of the frame is modeled after the accession number for the painting. It's just appended with FR. But clearly that's not a very reliable or even scalable way to manage the data and offer it to end users. So we are using the relationship builder to create those relationships. The relationship builder is meant to be used by humans who are able to associate two objects together. And again, the relationship builder is a good example of how some collection information is not coming from our collections management system. Even though we could build these relationships in our collections management system, we think this web-based interface is much easier to maneuver for humans. So how is it linked data-based? So I think this is where I start talking about the CDOC CRM a little bit more in depth and how the Yale Center for Body Shot uses it to organize its collection information. You've already seen some of this recently with Stephen Stead, but I think it's important to recap a few key points about the CRM. So what is a CRM? Well, the CRM provides definitions and a formal structure for describing the implicit and explicit concepts and relationships used in cultural heritage documentation. And here I highlighted implicit because it's the part in our data sets that traditionally gets left out by relational databases. For example, in the painting online record we saw just a minute ago, there was the image of an object and next to it a date. And we, as humans, infer that it means that the painting was created on a certain date. What's left out, though, is a production event as an entity altogether. So the CRM is an event-centric data model. You've just heard me say production event, and I'll come back to this in a short while. It's also an ontology, not a schema, that enables the interchange and integration of cultural information. It's worth noting also that it is an international and multidisciplinary standard that's not just for American museums. It's really a global standard. In fact, the CRM became an ISO standard in 2006 after 15 years of development hosted by CDOC. CDOC is the ICOM International Committee for Documentation. The CRM is based on data structures used in practice across multiple disciplines, not on terminology. And that's important because it allows for much more interoperability. The CRM describes how objects or entities relate to each other, and it has 86 classes and 137 properties. So I know you've seen this, the CRM top-level classes slide before with Stephen Stead, and I'll go over this in a few seconds. But I think what's worth retaining from this graph is that it's very close to human language. That's how I think about it. So the human language, which is articulated around the notions of who, what, when, where, and how. So at the core of the CRM are temporal entities, which we see right here. We also call them events, past events. Events are the critical node which allow us to join everything together. For example, you'll notice that time spans down here are only associated with events, not directly with objects or people. People and objects, all places, need to be linked to events in order to be connected with time spans and places. Of course, actors, people, take part in events. Actors can be individuals or groups of individuals. And actors affect things. And there are two types of things. We talk about conceptual objects, which are the products of the human mind, and the physical things. So this is the base structure for the CRM, and it's composed of events, actors, places, and time spans, and the things that we act upon. There are also two other classes, the appellations and types, because that's how humans like to map out the world. So what is the role of the CRM ontology? Well, choosing an ontology is agreeing on concepts, i.e. classes, CRM classes, and the relationships or properties in the CRM between these concepts. The consequence of independently mapping our collection information here at the YCBA to the CDOC CRM allows us to semantically search other data sets that have deployed their own CDOC CRM mapping. And I can tell you about the wonderful things that the CRM does until I'm blue in the face, but I think if I don't illustrate with an actual example, it won't carry the same meaning, obviously. So, so for example, you will remember that the YCBA and the British Museum contributed their data sets in RDF format, organized with the CRM to the research space environment. And research space can search on these two data sets. So how does it work? This is what our data graph for the production event looks like here at the YCBA. So it might seem a bit dizzying at first, but actually I think modeling data in such a visual way is a lot more intuitive than reading RDF. This slide is really to show that even when our terminologies do not match, the British Museum, for example, uses the attribution qualifier ascribed to, whereas the YCBA does not use ascribed to. We use attributed to, and this is in tiny little print here. But at least we agree that both attribution qualifiers are talking about the likelihood, certainty of the attribution, and so we use the same CRM property P14 carried out by to express them. So that allows the research space to search on the level of certainty or uncertainty, regardless of the vocabularies used. This is also a good example of how the CRM works of data structures used in practice across multiple disciplines and not on terminologies. And this slide finally is also to show that using the CRM allows to aggregate data from different collections without losing perspective or local knowledge, and local knowledge that's embedded in this terminology here. Another example of how the CRM respects and retains local perspectives is our data modeling for framing events. We've seen earlier that the YCBA frames are not considered accessories to the paintings, but equal. The CDOC CRM allows us to create an aggregate object for both painting and frame, and thus describe the frame painting and track the framing history that we can deduce from it. If our current practice had been different, had been to treat frames as subordinates to the paintings, then the CRM data model here would have been different. I would not have used these properties, and I would not have created this aggregate object here in the middle. Just coming back to the linked data part of the relationship builder, here are the URIs that it uses for the painting at the top with the painting unique identifier, and the frame, again, a URI with its unique identifier. And the property, the CRM property P16I was used to create an aggregate object. And here's the URI for the aggregate object, and it's worth looking at this unique ID at the end here. Notice that it appends obviously the painting unique ID with the frame unique ID. So this is really the URI for this aggregate object, which is a framed painting. So as a conclusion on the CRM part, I would simply like to state that the CRM preserves the variability of cultural heritage data, but provides the semantic glue to harmonize it. It doesn't mandate fields or values. Rather, it retains local perspectives embedded into institutional systems based on geography, institutional disciplines, and historical objectives. It provides semantic relationships and connections to support high-quality research, education, and engagement. So earlier, Pedro Zacchelli talked to you about RDF mapping tools, and I'd like to briefly go over our process here at the YCBA. So in terms of mapping to the CRM, I think it's fair to say I did it the hard way without any tools, except for a free graph editor and many conversations with Martin Dewar, who is the creator of the CDOC CRM, Dominique Oldman, senior curator at the British Museum, and primary investigator for Research Space, as well as Vladimir Alexeyev, who works for OntoText. We've documented this back and forth in Confluence, and I'm actually thinking about tidying it up a bit to put on GitHub. So our conversion process, there are two tasks that are used to handle the different operations that lead to RDF data. There is the XML harvest and then the RDF conversion. The process harvests objects and images, XML files, then converts them to RDF, and then uploads them to the triple store. So in terms of generating the RDF, we used to use the British Museum RDFer, which is a system that they had developed in-house. But we're now using XSLT to edit the config files. The config files are where we embed the rules as how to treat our data. For example, that's where we indicate that the attribution qualifier style of needs to be used in connection with the CRM property P15 was influenced by, and thus indicate a level of uncertainty. The only proprietary system that we currently use is OntoText triple store that you can see here in the graph. So in essence, we're looking at linked data to enable a platform for the scholarship of Earlyshot by using the network environment as its database. And that's my last slide, actually. So most of what I've said today is already documented on our technology page, and this is this address here, or posted on GitHub. Our work has been closely associated with and supported by international efforts from major institutions like the British Museum and by international standards groups like the CDOC. So I'm also putting down the URLs for the British Museum's linked data page, Research Space, as well as Dominique Oldman's blog. I have also put down the address for the CDOC CRM Special Interest Group and the CDOC Statement of Linked Data Identifier for Museum Objects, which we talked about last week. So this is my last slide, and I'm happy to take questions if there are any. Thank you.
Emmanuelle, when you are using these linker, you're linking between objects in your own museum, not across institutions, correct?
We do both, actually. We link across objects in our collection only so far only with the frame so far, actually. We are planning on developing the relationship builder to accommodate for relationships between reproductive prints and their paintings and other types of relationships that will be dictated by the curators and see how we can work them or express them with the CRM. But we are linking our objects to the British Museum objects in the research space environment. Actually, 3 museum datasets are expressed in the research space environment. It's us, the British Museum, and the Rijksmuseum that has provided I think, a subset of their collection. Yeah.
It's just interesting that I think we're all struggling with similar things, and I think after Patricia and I get through with what we're going to present, there's probably a lot of room for discussion about how we can collaborate.
Yeah, definitely. I think, it's a little bit hard to be on the bleeding edge, basically, because the nature of linked data is to link to other data sets, isn't it? So if there are only a couple of museums data sets expressed that way, then right, something needs to happen here. And I think also that's where research space is very interesting, is that we need an environment that enables that type of linkage. And research space is a good example of that.
Emmanuelle, this is Neil. I have a 2-part question. The first is, I noticed that as you're extracting data from your collections management system, your XML format is mapping to Lido. And I'm wondering, did you find Lido to be rich enough in its ability to map all the entities that you ultimately wanted to bring into the CDOC CRM context?
Yes, that's right. We're starting from the Lido XML representation of our data. Yes, Lido has been very useful. We started way back then with CDW Lite, which, as the name implies, was a very lightweight format and was really good for very basic tombstone information. But when Lido came around, then all of a sudden we started to be able to express more about our objects, such as bibliographic citations or exhibition history, or we're working on provenance right now. So currently we're using Lido for very rich data sets. The only thing we are not doing in Lido, and again, it's not the fault of Lido, I think it's more because of the fact that linking objects in our collections management system is a little bit clunky. So the part that is not done in Lido is this frame to painting relationship. We do that directly in the relationship builder, and we send those triples to our triple store to be merged with the other triples that come from, that start from the XML, the Lido XML. Yeah.
So you could use Lido, but you have the convenience of the application, and that works fine.
Yeah, exactly. We could definitely use Lido to express those relationships, but I think we've come to a point where we're kind of eager to keep, to try out more things with linked data. And on the face of things, this relationship builder is a very simple interface, right? And so it has this intuitive edge to it that even if you don't know anything about linked data, even if you don't know anything about traditional relational databases, you're still able as a researcher to pour your knowledge into it. And that's really what we're after right now. We're really interested in massaging in-depth cataloging and research information, and really leveraging that content through linked data.
It sounds like it's enabling non-technical folks to get involved in the right ways to establish relationships ad hoc or in contexts where it makes sense for them to be doing that outside of your routine of converting the data.
Exactly. Yeah, it's an additional tool. Exactly.
So sorry, but one other question, which is that it's so interesting that three organizations, Yale and Rijksmuseum and British Museum, have mapped their data to CDOC and then performed some harmonization to make it all discoverable within the context of research space. And I'm curious, now that you've been through that process, what's your sense? And it may be that we don't know the details yet, but do you have a sense of what it means for an organization to go off on its own in order to model, within CDOC in a way that's effective for them versus following, say, a standard that's gone before them, the way the British Museum has modeled things, or how does that affect the harmonization process at the end?
Right. So I think it's a two-part question. I think the first is to kind of dissociate a little bit the IT infrastructure from the data modeling, and I'll come back to that. And the other one is, and you've already put your finger on something very valuable here. The YCBA and the British Museum did work together on learning. Certainly on my part, the CRM and developing data models. But at the same time, we each tried to stay very focused on our own collections. So at the end of the day, we ended up developing two different data models. And yet, with the CRM being the meta-ontology, harmonizing all of that knowledge, it still makes sense. It works at the end of the day. So, just to come back briefly about the first half of your question, developing data models it's a very brutal kind of intellectual exercise, if you will. And that really means jumping both feet in. And I think I've heard that many times from my CRM colleagues. That exercise should definitely be driven by the researchers, by the curators. It's really, the point is to stay really focused on the intellectual integrity of their data, and then invoke the IT infrastructure, the triple store, to transform that knowledge. But you know where I'm going. The focus really needs to stay on the content, the intellectual content of that knowledge. Yeah.
And Emmanuelle, this is Eleanor, and that statement you just made touches upon some of the things you and I were discussing yesterday, both among each other, but later on when we were talking about the panel that's going to take place at MCN. Can you comment a little more on requirements from a staffing point of view as more and more museums consider embracing linked open data? From your experience, what does it take in terms of knowledge and expertise?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a complex question, really, because we're a small team here at the YCBA, and we've accomplished everything we have in the last couple of years with basically 4, maybe 5 people. So that's really the core team. Now that team expands a little bit as soon as we reach out to our wonderful colleagues at the British Museum, at CDOC, at CRM, and other places. But yes, the core team is very small, which brings me to another point. And I think, yes, we did talk about that several times in the last few days, is that there really needs to be this mapping to the CRM process really needs to be embedded in the institution at the museum. And so here it's fallen on me, and that's absolutely great. And it absolutely makes sense, I think, because as a data manager, I've seen our data set being transformed from a collections management system into Lido XML, and then another round of those transformation goes out to RDF. And at the end of the day, I still have to make sure that what the curators initially meant is still there. And so I think it's, again, a two-part kind of answer on my part. It really needs to be a knowledge that stays with the institution, and it's, you know, we're a small team, so it's not, yeah, you know, all of that has been added to whatever we already do at the YCBA. So the IT infrastructure part of the answer, that's complex, definitely. You know, installing a triple store, that's definitely not trivial, as IT people would say. But we did it all with, again, 4 or 5 people.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things we somewhat, while we were brainstorming and thinking yesterday, is that, well, first of all, as you've just said, it takes a champion, someone who's responsible for the intellectual piece of this. But in the long term, if linked open data really is going to become more prevalent across cultural heritage institutions, eventually, just as the web, when it first came into being, required museums to rethink their technical needs, and that they needed someone as a webmaster to be responsible for that piece of it, that as this linked open data moves forward, museums will begin to realize that they do need to invest in a certain technical expertise to get up and manage and have the triple store and so forth, if that's the direction they're taking.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Now, I should have mentioned also that we are actually not maintaining our triple store in-house anymore. We do have wonderful colleagues here at Yale in the YDC2 unit, Yale Digital Collection Commons. I think I'm not butchering their name, but they are maintaining the triple store in the cloud for us.
So who is that again? Sorry, you mean another? I'm sorry, another area of Yale?
That's right. That's and YDC2 is headed by Meg Bellinger, and they are really the champion on campus for collaborative projects. So.
Right. And in the case of the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Central Smithsonian IT has taken a role in this, so for
neither
support.
Are using LM anymore. Neither are using LM anymore for a triple store?
I guess not.
Oh.
Go ahead, Emmanuelle. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, you know, there are ways, I suppose, to manage the technical needs like that. We started out managing our own triple store, but we quickly realized this was not the best thing for us to do. So it's an interesting problem where museums, on the one hand, need to keep doing what they do best, and that's produce quality research and knowledge, and yet they're also asked to disseminate all of that through, machine-to-machine language. And that part is a little bit more complex, and that's certainly a little bit more outside of what we've been doing for years traditionally. The other thing that I'd like to mention is that, yes, we need to rethink our technical needs, but the first thing that we really need to do is really think about our data differently. We're not talking about information anymore. We're really talking about data. We're not talking about documents. We're talking about data. And that needs to happen first and foremost. If that exercise doesn't happen first, then, you know, transforming or invoking linked open data is not going to happen. So I'm sorry to say that we've gone full circle, basically, and we really needed to take a second pass at how we manage our data within our collections management system and really make sure that it was consistent and shareable, and that its metadata was also consistent and shareable. Linked data works off of both data and metadata. It doesn't make a difference. So we've had to go back to our internal practices and rethink about that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
Okay. How do we, what?
I do have one more if we're almost ready. I don't know if anyone out there has a question. You're more than welcome to ask them while we have these experts on hand.
Rachel,
but yeah.
Rachel Allen sent a question. She has it typed in the chat.
Okay.
Why use Lido at all? Okay. Well, Lido, the need to exchange our data set with data aggregators came before we wanted to express our data as linked data. So you might remember that we were the museum who contributed the most object records to Google, the Google Art Project, which is now the Google Cultural Institute. And so that was because we relied on Lido. We did not send in Excel spreadsheets. We handed them Lido XML files. So this need for exchanging data back and forth has been here at the center before linked data happened for us. But yes, Lido maps to the CRM. It's actually CDOC CRM compliant, but one does not need to have this Lido XML step or phase, if you will, in your data management. You could go, I suppose, from directly from your collections management system in whatever format that's expressed to linked data.
And actually, I think we're going to address that in my presentation too.
And also,
great.
This is Eleanor again, because Rachel, in the case of the Smithsonian model, they did not use Lido as part of the
Correct.
step. And
Yep.
we do hope we will have a short presentation soon on the Smithsonian model again, so that participants have a sense of different models and approaches. I just wanted to say, and I know if there are more questions, that's fine, but I just wanted to say I'm happy to report, given the obvious expertise we have here with Yale Center for British Art, and of course to be followed by the Getty, but I'm happy to say, in the case of Yale Center for British Art, that Emmanuelle and I spoke yesterday, and they are anxious to join the American Art Collaborative. So that expertise will be there for us as we proceed in discussing our roadmap and how we want to move on toward publishing in linked open data. If there aren't any other questions,
I have one about how we share our screen.
Okay. Emmanuelle, I want to thank you. Hope you're going to stay on for the Getty presentation.
Yes.
And I think I'm going to now turn it over to Patricia Harpring, the editor of the Getty Vocabularies.